Chapter 3 Scorch in the Stone. It was true what Ben had said to Mal in the library. The kingdom's business waited for no man, not even the king. The United States of Aradon was a vast empire that held all the good kingdoms, from Triton's Bay in the west to Neverland in the east, all the way to the mountain lands up north and Bell's Harbor village down south, and its governance was no small task. After bidding goodbye to Jay and the girls outside the cafeteria, Ben opened his locker and exchanged his plain daytime crown for the more elaborate one he wore for official meetings of the King's Council. Okay, so it probably wasn't the best idea to keep it in his school locker, being studded with irreplaceable jewels and all. But then again, this was Aradon, and nothing bad ever happened here. No petty theft, no grand larceny, nothing. He once found a penny and it was returned to him immediately. He once lost a penny and it was returned to him immediately with a second penny for interest. That was how Aradon rolled. Ben also made a note to have a word with Chad. Even if he knew Jay could handle it, his black eye bothered Ben more than he cared to admit. Ben didn't expect everyone to be perfectly good all the time, but he did expect the people of Aradon to try to do better. Otherwise, what was the point of keeping the villains separated? They might as well all live under a dome. It had been a few weeks since his parents had left for their retirement dream Mega Kingdom cruise. King Beast and Queen Belle had gone off in the royal yacht, leaving him to deal with everything. He passed the tourney fields on the way back to his own palace, wishing that he had time for practice. But most of his free time went towards packed royal schedule now. Pinning awards on heroes at fancy receptions instead of hanging out with friends, welcoming dignitaries like the Fitzherberts who were in town that week rather than playing video games. Sometimes Ben felt older than his 16 years. After presiding over the recreation center opening and shaking hands, or was it paws, with many furry and funny little creatures, those sidekicks were actually pretty hilarious. He hoped he wasn't late for the meeting. Just because he was king didn't mean that he wanted to take advantage of people's time. "Ready, sire?" Lumiere asked, standing sentry in front of the king's conference room. Ben nodded and smoothed down his lapels. "The King of Aradon," Lumiere announced as he opened the door with a flourish. "The King of Aradon," the assembled counselors replied. "Hail King Ben." At ease, said Ben, settling into his chair. The throne had been built to hold his father and still didn't quite feel like his own. He looked around the long conference table, smiling and greeting his advisors. Lumiere had placed the usual plate of sugar cookies and a pitcher of spiced tea in the middle of the table, and he waited until everyone had taken a bite and had something to drink before starting. "Hello, Doc. Is it just you today?" he asked, greeting his most senior advisor in the room. The old dwarf nodded after taking a sip from his glass. "Grumpy sends his apologies, sire, but he got up on the wrong side of the bed and is feeling out of sorts today." Ben suppressed a smile and moved on to the next counselor. "How are you today, Jeannie? I saw Jordan on the way over." "Wonderful. Couldn't be better, Your Highness," said the big blue genie, giving Ben his trademark grin. "I'm glad the school allowed her to live in her lamp instead of the dorms. You know us genies, we need to be bottled up." Ben chuckled and surveyed the remaining seats at the table and noticed that several were empty. "Is this everyone for today?" he asked. "Yes, sire," said Doc. "The Dalmatians are out touring 101 colleges. Mary, Gus, and Jack are busy since Cinderella is preparing for her annual ball, and so it's just me, Jeannie, and the three good fairies today. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, a trio of stout, middle-aged women in colorful pointed hats and matching dresses and capes, beamed and waved from the other end of the table. "Perfect," said Ben. "Shall we run through the issues and updates?" asked Doc, who peered up from his scroll and blinked behind his spectacles. "If you please." Ben leaned back in his chair, listening to the regular report on every aspect of his kingdom. After the horror of the incident with Maleficent, it appeared life had returned to its regular, serene rhythm. Although the kingdom scientist had noted a few unusual weather patterns of late, not just the rash of Waradon City earthquakes, but unexpected frost in the Summerlands and unusual lightning storms in the East Riding, among other unseasonal phenomena. Ben noted their concern, but as he pointed out to the council, it wasn't as if anything could be done about the weather. He yawned, and as Doc droned on, he tried to keep his eyes open, and failed, and got a few winks when Doc loudly cleared his throat. "Ahem," said Doc. "Excuse me, sire." Having been trained by a life with Sleepy, he was well versed in the manner of waking up when suddenly asleep. Ben sat in his chair and blinked awake, embarrassed. "Sorry, what did I miss?" "I was saying that's all we have of the regular business. But now, if you please, we have ambassadors from Camelot here to see you. They said it was an emergency, so I slotted them in. I hope that's all right," said Doc. "They've come a long way." Ben nodded. Of course. By all means, send them in." Lumiere opened the door again and announced with great zeal, "The wizard Merlin and Artie, son of Arthur." Merlin, an old and wizened wizard in blue robes, and Artie, a young boy of about 12, wearing a plain tunic that marked him as a squire, walked into the conference room. Artie looked around, seemingly amazed by the sight of Genie floating next to the fairies. Camelot had its own extraordinary inhabitants, of course, but Artie probably hadn't seen something quite like him before. Genie noticed the boy staring in awe, and pulled one of his many ridiculous faces, sending Artie into a fit of giggles. "Arthur sends his regards," said Merlin, bowing to the king and shooting Artie a quick glare. The boy bowed as well, but couldn't hide his smile. "He's dealing with a problem right now, so he was unable to join us." "What seems to be the matter?" asked Ben. "There's a monster in Camelot," Artie interrupted. Genie startled. "A monster?" "Well, I think it's a monster," said Artie, abashed and defensive at the same time. "What Artie is trying to say is that something is causing a lot of mayhem in town, scaring the villagers and setting fires," Merlin said. "It's become quite a disturbance." "Is that so?" asked Ben. "Yes, it's been a few weeks now. We've tried to catch the creature, but it keeps evading our traps, as if it had disappeared into thin air. Days will pass, then out of nowhere it attacks again. Villagers have lost sheep and chickens, gardens have been trampled, whole rows of cabbages at a time." Merlin took off his pointing hat and wiped his brow. "It's been a real headache. Arthur decided to stay in Camelot in case it returned while we came to seek assistance." "How can we be of help?" Ben leaned forward, eager to provide aid. This was so much more interesting than the news that villagers in the province his mother was from were complaining about the price of eggs once again. Singing about it, too. Merlin shuffled his feet. "That's why we're here, Your Highness. We've come to ask for permission to use magic to track down the creature." I see," said Ben. "Magic." He sat back in his throne. "He means the real stuff, too," Doc whispered in his ear. "Not just turning dresses a different color or giving someone a new haircut like my nephew Doug tells me is happening at school these days." "Is there no other way to catch this monster?" Ben asked, frowning and tapping his pen on the table. "We've tried everything, and unfortunately, so far we haven't been successful," said Merlin. "We wouldn't be here otherwise." "And you believe that with the use of magic you will be able to catch it?" asked Flora with a stern face. "What if it doesn't work? What then? Magic can go very wrong, you know," added Fauna, adjusting her red hat as it slipped to the side of her curly gray hair, "as my sisters and I have seen firsthand." "The consequences of using magic recklessly can certainly be very dangerous," agreed Merryweather, her face screwed up with concern. The rest of the table murmured its agreement. Merlin drew himself up to his full height. He wasn't much taller than a dwarf, but he was intimidating nonetheless. He shot the King's Council a frosty glare. "Need I remind you that I am the wizard Merlin? I am very well aware of the dangers of magic, and it is my belief that I will be able to use it prudently to capture this infernal creature and send it away so it is not to bother us again. You have my word." The counselor turned to the king. I understand, wizard Merlin. Ben met Merlin's glare and tried not to show how nervous he was. He was the leader here now. His father had left the kingdom safekeeping in his hands. I will consider your request, but I will need to discuss it with my team before making a decision. Thank you for informing us about the situation in Camelot, he said carefully. The old wizard nodded gruffly. Come on, Archie, let's find ourselves a chocolate chip cookie while we wait. When they left the room, Ben turned to his counselors. Can I do that? Let Merlin use his magic in such a manner? You can do anything you want now that you're king, Doc said. You have absolute power. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, Ben thought to himself. He needed to be cautious. When was the last time magic of this level was used in Auradon? He asked his advisors. Let's see. Probably the last time was when Fairy Godmother created the dome that kept magic out of the Isle of the Lost. And after that, it's been your father's and Fairy Godmother's policy that we learn to live without magic. Even without a dome over our heads, said Jeanie. It was hard to adjust at first, but we managed. And we are better for it, said Flora with a sniff. A little hard work never hurt anybody. Ben agreed. Magic wasn't expressly forbidden in Auradon, but it was discouraged, and when the kingdom was more orderly for it. It would be reckless to just disregard the policies King Beast and Fairy Godmother had put into place for the sake of one issue in a faraway kingdom. Even in the hands of careful users, there had been a few incidents when magic had gone awry lately. Genie was known to accidentally grant wishes to the wrong person when he left his lamp lying around. Even the 3 good fairies slipped every once in a while, often letting their generosity get the best of them. They had created a massive ice castle for Ben's birthday party one year, which was dazzling until it melted and caused it a flood. Merlin was one of the most powerful magicians in the land, and if he was allowed to use magic on such a large scale, who knew where it could lead? Ben motioned to Lumiere to send Merlin and Artie back into the room. I have considered the urgency of your request, he told them. Thank you, Your Highness, Merlin said looked hopefully and eager to get going. Ben held up his hand. He wasn't finished. But for now, I am going to reject your petition to use magic to capture this creature. Merlin frowned and his face turned red behind his beard. This was certainly not the news he had been hoping for, and the old wizard was certainly used to getting his way. Artie looked particularly glum. The idea of defeating a horrible creature with ancient magic had obviously been an exciting one for the young squire. Before Merlin could object, Ben continued. I will travel to Camelot myself to assess the situation. I will leave with you first thing in the morning. He would have to miss a day of classes, probably 2, but hopefully he would be back in Auradon by the weekend. Besides, it sounded like an adventure, and before Mal and her friends had arrived, even Ben had very few of those in Auradon. Very good, sire, said Merlin, elbowing Artie to bow like he did. Let's just hope Camelot is still standing when we get there.